We've all been there, exploring an open world on the verge of discovery, only to slam face first into, well, nothing. And at that moment, the immersion shatters like a broken screen. Why do we hate invisible barriers so much? Well, it's not just a gamer thing, it's a human thing. Today, we're diving into the psychology of something that frustrates players so deeply, yet is still present in a lot of open world games. And that is invisible walls. Hello everyone, welcome back to my game design channel. I'm Nick Latray, and today we're talking about invisible walls. Invisible walls in games are like a broken promise. As humans, we're wired for curiosity and exploration, traits that have been part of our DNA for millennia. When we encounter an invisible wall, it disrupts our instinct and challenges our expectation. In a well-designed game, we expect freedom to explore our surroundings. When a game sets up an environment that feels endless or explorable, only to limit us with an invisible wall, it creates a sense of betrayal. It's like being invited to a buffet and told you can only eat from one plate. Annoying, right? This creates a lot of frustration. Let's talk about some games that have notoriously struggled with invisible walls. Take Black Myth Wukong, for example. The hype for this game was through the roof, and while early gameplay looked fantastic, reviewers and viewers alike were pointing out the jarring invisible walls. Following the release of the game, players were quick to realize that the flow of exploration was often interrupted, frustrating players who wanted to fully immerse themselves in the mythological world. Most were quick to point out the flaws in level design. The use of invisible walls sparked a lot of player frustration despite the game's success in other areas. Players complained that these invisible barriers disrupted their exploration, especially since the game's design lacked a map to guide them. While invisible walls have been used in games for years, Wukong's implementation was considered particularly jarring because it broke immersion, often blocking what appeared to be accessible paths. This was discussed heavily online by players who felt it interrupted the flow of the game, creating frustration in a world meant to be open and discoverable. Even in games like Assassin's Creed or The Division, which are known for their open worlds, invisible barriers can crop up in the weirdest places. It feels out of place in an environment that promises so much freedom. For games like these, the problem isn't just technical, it's psychological. It breaks the sense of immersion that games work so hard to create. To avoid the frustration caused by invisible walls, developers have employed several strategies to maintain immersion and the flow of exploration. For example, natural barriers. Instead of invisible walls, the game could use natural environmental barriers such as cliffs, rivers, or dense foliage to signal the edge of an area. This would feel more organic to players and preserve immersion. Signposting. Subtle visual or environmental cues can guide players to the right path without making it obvious that other areas are inaccessible. For instance, a broken bridge or a blocked tunnel can clearly convey limits without breaking immersion. Unlockable paths. Introducing blocked areas that later become accessible as players progress or gain new abilities could add a sense of reward. This approach is common in Metroidvania-style games, allowing players to backtrack and discover previously unreachable zones. Better world design. If the level design were crafted more fluidly, with fewer dead ends or misleading paths, it could reduce the need for artificial barriers. Expanding certain areas or providing a clearer visual language in the environment might prevent players from encountering walls that feel unfair. These strategies could have created a more seamless experience, allowing players to enjoy exploration without the jarring impact of invisible walls. So why do we even get so frustrated about such a silly thing? Well, it comes down to psychology. So why do humans dislike invisible walls so much? Well, it all boils down to immersion. Immersion is crucial for a satisfying game experience, and encountering invisible walls can shatter that illusion. From a human perspective, we naturally value freedom and exploration, especially in gaming, which offers an escape from the physical constraints of the real world. When you see an open world environment but suddenly hit an invisible wall, it creates a major mismatch between your expectations and your actual experience. Let's break down a few psychological reasons why invisible walls can be so frustrating. First up, we have expectation versus reality. When players see an area they can visually access but find themselves blocked by an invisible wall, it creates inconsistency. Your brain processes the visual cues, suggesting freedom to move, but the game's restrictions lead to frustration and cognitive dissonance. Next, there's the loss of control. Games often provide a sense of autonomy. Players make choices and navigate the world. When invisible walls confine players arbitrarily, that feeling of control evaporates. You end up feeling restricted in a space that's supposed to be all about exploration. Then we have the break in immersion. Immersion is essential in many genres, especially those focused on storytelling and exploration. Invisible walls remind us that the game world is a fabricated space with rules, pulling us out of the story and disrupting that crucial suspension of disbelief. Finally, let's talk about human curiosity. We're naturally curious creatures, and games reward exploration. But when players encounter invisible barriers, it discourages that curiosity. It diminishes the reward mechanisms, like discovering hidden items that games use to entice exploration. Invisible walls conflict with our psychological expectations. They disrupt our desire for consistency, freedom, and immersion, which are foundational to enjoyable gaming experiences. But of course, it's not all open-world games that get this wrong. There exist solutions. So, what's the alternative? How do some games get it right? Let's talk about Kingdom Come Deliverance. In this game, when you try to venture beyond the boundaries of the map, the main protagonist, Henry, often says something along the lines of, "I shouldn't go that way," or "There's nothing for me out here." The dialogue is simple but effective, serving as a narrative-based way to keep the player within the playable area. These phrases keep the immersion intact because they feel like natural, in-character reactions for Henry, who's not an explorer or adventurer in the grand sense, but rather a grounded individual with more localized goals and concerns. This approach subtly reminds players of their limited movement within the world without breaking the immersion, compared to invisible walls or other blunt mechanisms of restricting player movement. Other games like The Witcher 3 or Red Dead Redemption 2 also use natural barriers. Mountains, impassable rivers, or even inclement weather to keep players within boundaries. These methods feel less like walls and more like a natural part of the game world. Some other developers have also gotten really creative in finding ways to keep players in bounds with innovative approaches to invisible walls, like in Fallout 4, where if you try to leave the first level before completing your objectives, a nuclear explosion wipes you out. It's an in-game reminder of the harsh post-apocalyptic reality, keeping you on track in a dramatic way. Then there's Far Cry 6. If you decide to sail away from Yara instead of getting involved in the conflict, you're treated to a humorous cutscene of Danny lounging on a beach in Miami, escaping the revolution altogether. It's Ubisoft's way of adding a clever meta twist in their in-game boundary. And in Subnautica, they took an eerie approach. If you swim too far from the safe zones, ghost leviathans start to spawn, massive, terrifying creatures that chase you down, effectively making you reconsider venturing too far. It's an incredibly creative way to maintain the tension while ensuring you don't wander beyond where the developers intended. Invisible walls may seem like a minor issue in game design, but they represent something much larger: the ongoing struggle between player freedom and technical limitations. As games strive to become more immersive and more expansive, how developers handle boundaries will significantly shape the player experience. Before I go, I would like to give a quick shout out to Hello Games, who claim to have developed the first real open world game in Light No Fire. They promised limitless exploration across a procedurally generated Earth-sized planet, but we all know how the CEO has a knack for over-promising. Remember the hype train that rolled out before the launch of No Man's Sky? So, will we ever see a truly borderless game? Only time will tell. So the next time you hit an invisible wall, don't just focus on the frustration, consider the psychology behind it and how it impacts your immersion. And if you want to see more content like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. No invisible walls here. See you in the next one.